um, Child Development 205, Intro to Special Needs, Chapter 2, Supporting All Learners. Welcome, 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 welcome to the lecture. We're just going to jump right in by sharing the PowerPoint. Good. Okay, again, so this is Supporting All Learners. It's Chapter 2, and it's great that we are talking about, Chapter 1 is like, what is special education and why are we doing this? This is kind of like Chapter 2. I call this when you sit down to play a board game with your friends. Maybe you played, Chutes and Ladders or Monopoly or Life or Clue or something like that. The first thing you do is basically put the rules out. Like, you guys kind of have to agree to the rules or else somebody's going to play Monopoly. Oh, that's not how we play Monopoly. That's not how we play Chutes and Ladders. You guys all have to be on the same playing field. So when this says supporting all learners, it literally means all learners. What we're going to learn tonight is about some foundations that are put into place that cover every student in America, not just the students identified for special education. So once you put all the same rules on the playing field, and some people maybe got it the first time, some people need to hear it a few more times, some people are never going to get it. That helps us identify which supports and helps kind of like identify how we can support some learners who need it and some learners who don't. So again, supporting our learners, it seems like, oh wait, aren't we talking about special education? Yeah, but we have to really look at the entire playing field first. Yeah, make sense? Because people are, oh, special education. I've heard it, I literally have heard of some people say, well, special education, that's like making it better for some people. No, no. Remember, special education is just a program of supports. It doesn't give anybody extra education. It literally raises the playing field so everybody's on the same page. Yeah. And I really like how the book features Malala Yousafzai here, such an advocate for education. Not, I wouldn't say that she has a disability, but she gained a disability by being an educational advocate. Do you guys know that, right? She was shot in the face. And so she does have a little bit of a physical disability, but she's not a disabled student. I think she was a typical learner. But girls in her country weren't really encouraged to get an education. She got shot because she said girls should be educated. That's wild to me. And so again, Nobel Peace Prize winner, 15-year-old, crazy. Okay, so if you want to watch her actual presentation, I'm not going to take our class time to do that because I know you guys can do it. This PowerPoint's already in the module. You guys can just click on the link there, which is great. It's really good. It's a good one. I've seen her speak. She's great. Oh, and FYI, I did look up because I was like, oh, I want to go to a TED Talk. That's kind of on my list of things to do. Because I was like, I would love to see Temple Grandin or Malala Yousafzai or whoever's like, speaking in TED. Yeah, it's a $12,000 ticket to go to a TED Talk.
Oh my gosh, TED Talks have really gone up. Like,
yeah, unless you go to a TEDx, which is like a sanctioned offshoot. Yeah, it's a different price point there. But I was like, oh my gosh. So again, every chapter in our book talks about learning outcomes at the beginning, which is great. Because again, if we're talking about rules of the game, the chapter should be talking about the rules of the game. So we plan for the end of the beginning, right? So our outcomes is like, we are going to learn about the areas of the US education and how it, it strives to do a good job, but it still has a lot to go. We all have like growing pains there, especially during COVID, yikes. We're going to learn about evidence-based practices. And I really am excited that Professor Fernandez is going to talk more about that. UDL is a fancy acronym for Universal Design for Learning. It does come from, it does sort of stem from the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and then it went into the IDEA, which is the Individual Education for All, right? Getting everybody education, but also universally designing a classroom and coursework and content so any learner can learn in different ways. And so we'll talk about UDL. That's a big one. That's a big one. Differentiated instruction, kind of pivoting to where the student needs in certain ways, and database decision-making, huge. For those of you who have worked in ABA, everything is data-driven. And I think that's a great place to start because people will say, well, how do you know this child has autism? How do you know this child's delayed? Well, would you like me to give you a frequency count of how many times he was able to do that, or maybe how many times that he wasn't able to do that based on what's a typically developed child at this age? I can give you the data, right? Because then, sometimes you'll get parents who are like, well, I don't believe you. It's just your opinion. Well, okay, we'll take him to the doctor and see what the doctor's opinion is. And then we'll compare notes, shall we? sometimes, right? So again, more data, the better. Always, 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 always. Let's see. Oh yeah, so introduction. We always just talk about what we're gonna look at ahead here. And they're gonna talk about bullying. Again, I don't read every word. I don't think you want me to read it at you. I think that'd be super duper boring. And again, when I say the same rules, I'm using that as a casual term for saying a solid educational foundation. Earlier, I talked before the recording about how brains are built. And we develop these neural pathways in our 0 to 3, 0 to 5. But again, if those neural pathways aren't given the opportunity to be built or reinforced, and then how do you build a skill on that later, right? So, and then there's another thing. Most of you have taken 107 before you took this class, and we talked a lot about brain building. If not, we can always supplement your information with some other stuff. I can share stuff from the other classes. But again, the more you build a brain, 0 to 3, 0 to 5, the better chances this child's going to have over a lifetime. I tell people, if you think I'm super hyperverbal and I talk a lot and I talk loud, yeah, I was a preschool student in a lab school, Fullerton College. So it's all their fault. You guys gave me a lot of neural pathways. Oh, you want to talk about this part? This is kind of, how well are we doing? Now, again, this book's from 2017. So how well are we doing? How do I take the first and third? 64 of fourth graders and 66% of eighth graders scored at the basic level, reflecting only partial mastery of the requisite skill or skills or below in reading. So basically, we're saying 2/3 of fourth graders and 2/3 of eighth graders, roughly, scored like at the minimum in reading. So let's talk about fourth graders. 10-year-olds can read at a minimum level. So not half, more than half. More than half of fourth graders can read it at the minimum level. 10-year-olds, do they need the skill of reading? Would they need the skill in reading to go to college? Would they need that skill in reading to apply for a job, pay bills, like sign a lease agreement, rent a car, anything? Yes. Look at eighth graders. Now, I understand 10-year-olds are kind of still just dialing it in, right? They're like still got ants in the pants and they're wild little recess monkeys. I get it. But eighth graders are like too cool for school, right? They're like, whatever, I'm in eighth grade. I'm like, so awesome, right? But again, only 2/3, not even 75% can read at the minimum level. That seems kind of low. Now, at the same time, I don't want to be biased or judgy because I was a voracious reader as a child. It's kind of like lonely kid who was like always reading. I don't do that so much now, but I think that helped a lot. And as a quick little pause, the discussion board this week is all about bias. Yeah. Isn't that wild? So I can tell you, I have a bias. My son's a good reader. He's not a great reader, but he's a good reader. I'm a great reader. I mean, I don't read for leisure, I read for work. And my husband will avoid it at all costs. So we've got the rainbow span of skills in my home. But I did realize that being able to read really quickly and understand things was helpful to me. And not everybody could do that. I did realize that. And I was always curious about that and how that is a struggle for a lot of people, just reading a bus stop poster or reading the schedule of when the bus comes. So again, if let's say even half of those students, let's say 30% of those students, half of those students, so about 30%. So those numbers went down. About 30, half of those students came out and got supports to bring their reading skills up. How much easier would it make their life? Even if they never went to college, how would it make school easier, life easier, their whole life easier? That's just heartbreaking to me. That's heartbreaking to me. And I'm not saying the teachers aren't doing their job. Now, we do know some teachers are amazing and do their jobs gangbuster, and other teachers could care less. So there's kind of a mixed bag there. I'm not saying it's all the students' fault, it's all the teachers' fault. It's not. Especially with COVID, it's hard. Nobody's getting extra super duper smart, making a lot of extra money, and has a lot of extra time and less stress on their hands, where it's all kind of compiled. But if these are the numbers from 5 years ago, are these numbers better or worse now? They're probably worse. Yeah, and that just, it's heartbreaking. Now, again, 60% of fourth graders and 67% of eighth graders performed at the basic level or below in math. That's a big one. That's a big one. I also believe that math in itself has a lot of trauma wrapped in math. Now, again, I wasn't a great math student. I wasn't a terrible math student. I was right in the middle. But I knew how to read a math book and push myself, right? But I do know about half of the students sitting in my classes right now have been like verbally abused by a math teacher at some point. I'm telling you, I ask every semester, do you ever have a math teacher who told you it would be terrible at math, you would never amount to anything? Does that need to happen from teachers? No, it doesn't, but it still happens. It's hard. Math is a hard one. It has a hard marker. Parts of our brain, again, if we weren't giving this enriched environment when we were little or supported environment when we were little, we don't even have the roads in which to sustain that math thinking. Now, I also believe that, you know, it is true that our brain still grows till 25. So sometimes at 10, you won't understand math, but at 15, you can understand it differently. And at 25, you're going to understand it differently. Yeah, I honestly believe that. So if you were ever pushed around or bullied by a math teacher, don't say that that's forever. Just say not yet, right? I don't understand math yet, right? And give it some time and then come back to it. That's what community college is for. That's why we have older students here. Despite the high school dropout rate is at an all-time low, 6.5%, it still reflects nearly 2.5 million individuals between 16 and 24 have not earned a diploma or equivalency credential. And I bet it was LAUSD just said something like 37% of the students are not coming to school and any sort of regular fashion. So the highest non-attendance rate. There's 1,000 reasons now. So, but the dropout rate's probably higher than that now. And if you look, you can look up stats. In fact, we might do that at some point in this class. I can get you the stats of all the high schools in Orange County, including the continuation high schools, what the dropout rate was or is. When I worked at Cal State Fullerton and I was doing math, like a Gear Up program, 1999, 2000, 2001, we were helping junior high school students learn math, like as tutors and whatnot, as a longitudinal study with the Department of Ed, get them into high school because the philosophy there was algebra. 7th grade algebra is the litmus test for college success. So let's get them cohort study, right? We had a 50% dropout rate when they got to the high school, Anaheim High School, Sycamore Junior High School and Anaheim High School. 50% dropout rate. It wasn't just in our program. That was the high school's number. 2001. That is the closest high school to Disneyland. I'm not saying that Disneyland is like, you know, all about the math. It's not, right? But we have this like society image of like how life is so perfect. And then we have like literally 3 miles away, 2 miles away, a high school that 50% of the students who start high school will leave. And that's just here. That's happening in districts all over America. It's heartbreaking. Now, again, right here, this is America's students. This is not America's disabled students. Sorry to tell you, these numbers are way up when we look at disabilities, right? Last is dropouts report, they would work hard if adults' expectations were higher and most believe they could have graduated if they tried. Meaning, have you ever said this as a teenager or heard a teenager say this one? Well, you know, my parents say I can't do anything right, so why should I try? Or my teacher said I was a total failure, so why should I even try? Is it that pivotal that parents and teachers can say that and make that much of a difference in children? Yeah, it is. I can change the grades in this class by just telling you what the grades, number one, what the average grades are in the class, and challenging you guys because I believe in you to bust those and take that average grade and raise it. I can do that by telling you guys that I believe in you. So if that is possible, if I could raise grades in the class, can I also lower grades in the class by my attitude and my words out of my mouth? Absolutely. And sadly, again, a lot of children don't have the supports that they need in order to really have a positive environment. It's heartbreaking. Oof. I'm not gonna hand like go down the rabbit hole on bullying. We all know that bullying is out of control. Our book doesn't even talk as clearly about cyberbullying. I mean, right here, this is bullying in general. I think we all experienced bullying, but I think it's harder now as a child Now, again, this is all students. This is not talking about disabled students. Disabled students get bullied more and more harshly. And it's different. And I mean, I do see a little bit of a buffer in there. I mean, my son, I don't allow him on social media. But even when I hear kids, like sometimes with autism, he could be in his group of students at school and they're not being mean or bullying, but they're just being really blunt and he doesn't even catch it. And so there is a little bit of a gift of autism there where they just that, oh, well, those guys like me. I'm like, I'm glad you think so, honey. You know, or my neighbor, the neighbor guys think I'm cool. Okay. Just, so bullying exists, and there's a lot more that exists that happens to our students who have differences. It is heartbreaking. Again, the teacher is the pivotal person here to get in there and either stop it, mitigate it, make sure it doesn't happen again. It's all those businesses. So let's move on to evidence-based practices. Evidence-based practices. Professor Fernandez, what would you say to a parent who wasn't glomming on to this idea of evidence-based practice? What's another way of saying evidence-based practices so it doesn't sound so technical or clinical?
I think evidence is just proof. We want to show you proof that this is what your child can do. And this is where we want to get your child. And this is how we're going to do it. And I'm going to prove it to you by showing when he came to me, he read 80 words a minute, and I'm going to get him to 85 by the end of next week. And I'm going to show you that. And then that's proof.
Yeah. And there's so many different ways to create evidence. There's so many different ways to create that proof. I mean, there's different roads to that, right? And you could be word count, it could be frequency, it could be quality, it could be interactions, it could be smiling, it could be starting a conversation. So there's so many different things. But again, if you don't capture the data, it didn't exist. Yeah. So when we talk about, just to keep this in the back of your mind, evidence-based practices is bring the hard sciences like math, really. You know, a lot of our students get like, ooh, I don't want to talk about math. It's like, no, math is okay. We can talk about math inside of behavior. It's fine. This is where we're crossing the hard sciences and the human sciences together. And this is what I love. I love it. Because a lot of times you'll see people in the hard sciences are like, well, we're the only sciences. And we're like, but wait a minute, humans are the scientists. So let's create more humans, and more humans are able to be scientists. And a lot of children with autism are great scientists. So I don't go down the like actual research methods so much, because it kind of depends on what we're looking at, right? This is just kind of like, if you took 107, we do talk more about research methods on how we gain this data. But like, again, Alicia was saying, like, if you're telling a parent, we're talking about one student, then we're doing we're either doing an interview or we're doing a case study or observation. And if you're just looking at one student, but if you want to look at a whole playground of students, that's a different type of study. If you want to research everybody on like one whole campus, that's a different type of study. If you want to research those people on campus for like 17 years, that's a different study too. So I don't go down the rabbit hole too far on research methods. Just know that there are ways to create clean data. Yeah, and so when you get in the field, you might hear terms like fidelity. I don't even like the word fidelity. It sounds like the bank, right? But it's an accurate word. What's another word for fidelity? Fidelity.
You want to prove it doing the same thing multiple times.
Right.
So did my kids empty the dishwasher? Fidelity would mean like, did I go look and the dishes are gone? And right. Then, so it would show that the dishwasher is empty. Right. So you want to prove it using the same way. So like we hear a lot of times, like, I'm sure, Cece, you're the situation you were talking about. Sometimes the kid does it at home, but then doesn't do it at the school. We hear that a lot. Is it being implemented the same way at the school that it is at the home? So then you would just kind of explain how you implement it at home, and then the teacher would look at it. And if she were using fidelity, implementing it the same way you were implementing at home, then you should get the same results given environmental factors aren't there. So that would be fidelity, doing the same exact thing and seeing the same results.
Right. So like, especially if you have two therapists or 2 one-on-ones like assigned to a child, and maybe one is like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and one's like Tuesday, Thursday. And the Monday, Wednesday, Friday BI or BT says, oh yeah, he can tie his shoes, no problem. And the Tuesday, Thursday person's like, no, he can't. There's probably a difference in fidelity, how that's being ruled out. And so what the supervisor will come in and be like, okay, let's see how you guys are both doing it. Well, one of them might say, okay, honey, put your foot up here on this blue chair and show me how you tie your shoe. Well, the next day, the kid's looking for the blue chair to put his foot up to tie his shoe because he's connected those two pieces. And it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that there's a very specific environmental control that like she said. So there's these things, and then at home they go like, he can't tie his shoe at all, and you're like, he does about 60% of the time here. So how are you doing it? Well, I just say, hey, tie your shoe, like over my shoulder as we're running out the door. It's not gonna help. That's not the same way. It's not being scaffolded or supported the same way. So again, those are growth areas for both the providers and the parents and things like that. So yeah, fidelity is one of those things. Like, it's like, again, as scientists, we all have our little bit of bias that we come in, but if we are rolling out a program or building a skill in the same way, the skill will actually build quicker. That's the bottom line.
What about, sorry.
No, I saw you raise your hand. I just wanted to get you.
What about like about the implementation was, what if they can't do the same things at home or at the school that they do at home? Like, for instance, the background that I come from, like say for instance, if I got in trouble, it wouldn't be like, oh, you don't get TV or something. Maybe I was like sent to my room, or I don't have my phone for the whole week. Or some cultures and backgrounds, they do discipline differently. It could be, maybe a spanking, or maybe wall, like what is it, like the wall squats, or like doing something like with a book. So how do we implement or get close to making sure that we're on the same page?
That's a great question. And I think if I could step in, I think we're talking about two different things. So I'm glad you checked us. So what you're talking about is either punishment or reinforcer on how to keep the behavior going. So you're at the end of the track and we're still teaching the behavior. So now if they veer to the right or veer to the left, then that's when we need you to come in and step in with the reinforcement or the punishment. But the fidelity is still in teaching it. So we're still back, and are we teaching it the same way to get the same results, so that we don't hear it's different at home than it is at school. Now, what you're saying, there could be other factors, like dad at home is punishing him if he doesn't do it this way, or the school isn't punishing him in this particularly manner because he isn't doing it this way. That would tell me that the child has the skill right there. The difference is the environment, which is not fidelity. So that's environment. And so the fidelity would go back to when it was taught. Obviously you had fidelity because he got the skill, but in other factors, which in this case sounds like environment, affects when and how he uses it. And that's positive reinforcement or it's punishment.
Right.
So it's two different things.
And so, yes, I kind of heard what you were saying, Cece, was like, because you might have a nice setup at school where they have a series of reinforcers and it's a positive environment and positive reinforcers, and they're getting the thumbs up or whatever works, whatever schedule you set up or however that works. But when they get home, they might be getting punished for not doing it. And it's hard because philosophically, we are not in the home. We're not the parents. We can't tell them how to punish and discipline. We can just always strongly encourage, like keep it in the positive reinforcer, right? And so, but at the same time, that's a cultural piece there too, because as providers, we tend to think, well, if the parents were doing what we're doing, the kid would be fine. And that's not always the case either. Now, providers, yes, may have specialized training, but parents are the parents, and they might not have that specialized training, but they may have a different set of positive reinforcers, but it's still a positive reinforcer. We can't necessarily come in there and say, you can't punish this child. It's better to say more like, the child responds better when you reward the positive behavior, because that makes that positive behavior increase. Because if you punish the negative behavior, you might even make that negative behavior increase. So it's almost like an educational moment for the parents, but we cannot tell them what to do. There's a fine line there. We just have to model and encourage more cheerleading. It's more cheerleading. How do you cross that bridge, Alicia, when they're like, oh, but we make him, my husband had to stand in the corner when he was little on his tiptoes, or else he'd get the spoon to his butt. And I'm like, how'd that work? Did you never?
That's a great way. Ask them, how did it work? Like, that's a great way to talk about punishments.
Like, oh, but it's not working. You're like,
right.
It's not working.
Right.
That's you can have a 4-year-old who has lost respect for their own parents already.
Right.
And then what?
And I do try to give examples of acceptable punishers. I'm not just, I don't live in, like, I use this scenario all the time. You know, when the police officer pulls me over, he doesn't say, good job driving the speed limit. Like, he hands me a $400 ticket. Like, we live in a world of punishers. They work, they're accurate, they're fast. As parents, I use them because they work. But there are acceptable punishers and there are not good punishers. Right. And so I try to give examples of good punishers. So like when I give all the time is like over when you do, like, a child has a throwing issue and they understand everything. So now I dump out and you have to pick up everything that I've thrown. That's a punisher. I'm intending to stop the future behavior. But it's acceptable. Like, we're just going to clean up versus a timeout or versus squats against a wall. So it's finding appropriate punishers to offer a suggestion to the family, not to use, but to, as a parent, I would use it on my own kids, but to offer an appropriate type of suggestion.
Yeah, I did get one about 2 weeks ago from the school. It was like, well, Peyton had a really rough day. And so we suggest that he's not allowed to enroll in after school electives until January. And I was like, so you're saying this one day equals 4 months of not going to cooking club. This one day, and he's in just to operationally define what he did. It was bad. And it was bad. He threatened his aide. He said, I'm going to headbutt you and I'm going to stomp on your toe. He like said all these things. He didn't do them. And I was like, we're still like, that's still like a good day. And like, I was like, it's all relative, right? I was like, good for you. He didn't actually headbutt you and stomp on your, like, right. We've had issues of that in the past. And I was like, well, I don't see this one day equal 4 months of a restriction. Now fast forward a couple of weeks, they're like, okay, we're going to sign him up for cooking club again. I was like, well, you told me I couldn't, which was my way of saying, yes, I'm going to, because you guys are being a little bit ridiculous. And I just reminded them, like, the reinforcement schedule needs to match, the intensity of the behavior, right? And so I signed him back up for cooking class. And today it was like, hey, just to let you know, we made him sign a contract that said if he had a rough day, which now that rough day looks a little bit nicer. Now it's like just non-compliance. It's not headbutting or threatening headbutting. It's like, I don't want to do my homework, blah, 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 blah. And when he's like complaining and not using proper words, like, I need to take a break, or can I take a walk around the yard, or can I get some water? Like, so if he's in that little negative Nancy and he gets a behavior code for the day, like a 1, 2, or 3, or whatever they do, that he doesn't go that day. So it's a 1-to-1. That day is bad. That afternoon, you don't get to go. That is, to me, a 1-to-1 reinforcer. I was like, thumbs up, you guys. That's perfect.
Right. And that's a great example.
Not typically does a mom tell the school. I just had to remind them, you guys may have had a bad day too. If you want to do this one day and push it off by 4 months, like, just take a step back, maybe talk to somebody else, and maybe let's review his reinforcement schedule. And they just answered back, we're considering your suggestions. Because I'm not the mom who, Right. So there are some ways to kind of put an overview on what actual evidence looks like. So we've talked about stuff at home, stuff at school, and even, so let's maybe be specific. Behaviors at home, behaviors at school, and behaviors between therapists. Now, if you can get the child doing the same skill in 2 separate environments with 3 separate providers, that is a very set of strong evidence, right? If the child's tying their shoe at home and tying their shoe on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the Tuesday, Thursday, right? Now you see the strong evidence. We can put data to that. We can say it happens here, it happens there, and it happens with different people. that's the goal. That's a fully generalized skill, right? But it takes a while to get all those pieces in place to know, right? Honestly, I think Peyton tied his shoes independently at 12. And we were like, but we did Velcro and slip-ons and stuff like that. We're not going to have that argument. I knew at 7, I'm no longer having this argument. So there's this piece where you have to just give it some time and follow, I guess, the path. Just follow the path, right? So again, if the intervention is here, so that was the first thing. If you get all these different, I don't like using randomized controlled trials. Yes, that's what we're doing. But if we have these skills being built in different areas with different people, now again, if you have those differences and those skills not being built by different techniques, there's no fidelity, nobody's even measuring fidelity, then of course it's not as strong. There's not as much evidence. There's not as much data to support that. So again, we can get super duper technical like this, but you don't exactly have to do that right now. I want you guys to have an overview of this. And then universal design for learning. This is how we know everybody has the same rules. Okay, UDL, UDL, UDL. And if you haven't noticed already, let me give you guys a heads up since you guys are already here. This is for the people who are here and for the people who watch the video. On your first exam, which is coming after like the end of next week is your first exam. It will ask you acronyms like UDL. Our job in special education is, or in medical field, full of acronyms. Education, full of acronyms. There's a question that has like 10 matching acronyms on your first exam because it's that big. Yeah. So make sure you're writing your notes and including acronyms. Yeah. So far we have UDL, IDEA, ADA. I think that's maybe OHI. That's all we have so far. Chapters 1 and 2. Yeah. Anytime you see an acronym, write it down. You'll need to know. Sure. So UDL was created by legislation. It's not just a bunch of parents who got together and said, oh, the rules need to be same for education. No, this is, again, under the ADA, which was like disabled support for everybody in the United States. Then we have the IDEA, then the Higher Education Opportunity Act. It was like trying to get people with disabilities to higher education. And then it also morphed into Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015. It's been a push to try to get people to understand education needs to be the same for everybody. And when it's not, there's no fidelity. Have you guys heard of this where maybe, I don't want to say it's a college class, maybe it was your high school class, where somebody says, oh yeah, I'm taking English with, Mr. Smith, and then I'm taking English with Miss Johnson, and they go, oh man, Miss Johnson's easy. She's cool. She grades really easy. That's an easy A. But Mr. Smith is way more rigorous, and maybe he grades harder, but he's expects more from you. And you guys see that there's no fidelity even in the same school. So now what if we're talking about two different schools? Oh man, you went to Canyon was super easy. Oh, you went to Valencia, that was like an IB school, no big deal, like whatever, whatever. You're a football team, you're whatever, right? How do you then say there's fidelity again among the schools? Wait, what if you say there's no fidelity from state to state or district to district? What? So legislation has to be put into place to say, hey, this is how we are all trying to maintain standards that are the same. Now, again, that's easier said than done. A lot of teachers know their expectations. They know what they need to do. Some do it great, some do it terribly. And quite frankly, certain school districts do pay different salaries. And so they attract a different type of teacher. So if I was going to teach at Aliso Viejo High School versus Wilson High School in Long Beach, Wilson High School gets paid better because it's like a lower SES school. It's in a very more challenging neighborhood. But the fidelity of the teacher is not necessarily in place. You follow what I'm saying? How many of you had a teacher who was like basically asleep in your class in high school? Yeah, we've all had at least one. Some schools are going to have more teachers who are checked out, just in it for the paycheck. And we can't we can't force people to do a great job, but we can get them out if they're not doing a good job. And then again, that's a whole nother conversation, but it's federal legislation in order to align all the standards and all the expectations of professors and teachers in order to do the same job at Aliso Viejo High School versus Wilson High School. There shouldn't be a difference, but there's a lot of differences. Okay, so I like UDL is keep three things in mind here. And again, write these in your notes. There's there's means of representation, meaning kind of like how I say here in my class, our class, about notes. You can write them out, you can do it, type them out, you can do a mind map, you can do Cornell notes, but it's just notes. It doesn't matter. You can outline it, you can bullet it, doesn't matter. I'm allowing multiple forms of representation. Why? Well, first of all, it's UDL and we are a public school. Community college is 13th and 14th grade. So ask yourself, would I teach UDL and not provide UDL? No. And quite frankly, universal means universal. Universal design for learning. All teachers should be doing something similar. Now, a rubric is put in place. You can say, oh, am I meeting all these pieces so I can get my points? But some rubrics can be a little bit more rigid, right? Or specific. Some teachers can be a little bit more rigid and specific, but multiple forms of expression is the number one thing of UDL. Number two, how you demonstrate what you have learned can change too. So in this class, we have quizzes, exams, like traditional quizzes and exams, but also the reflection. That's called a formative assessment. It shows us how it's connected to you and how you, in a more narrative form, tell us what you've learned. Because yes, a quiz is a quiz and a test is a test. But on that last part of the test, I do put a 10-point essay question. It's not the end of the world, right? And so there's this piece on there about how you are learning it. Everybody comes to this information in different ways, in different respects, with different cultures and different understandings and different jobs, different ages and backgrounds and genders and everything, right? So yes, you can click true or false and be accurate, but also the essay gives you that room to show us what you know. It doesn't have to be perfect, just show us what you know. And next week, if you guys are here for the next week's lecture on the IEP, I will give you a sneak peek on the first essay question. Sneak peek into class. Is that fair?
I think it's a great reinforcer.
It's a great reinforcer, but you know what? It's even good for people who can't make it. Here's another option. I know a lot of people can't make it. They just watch the video. That just ensures that they watch the video. Another reinforcer. Multiple forms of, this one is like multiple means of engagement. You can come to class. You can have your video on. You can not have your video on. You can come, you can leave, you can come, or just not come and watch the video. So is UDL alive and well in here? Hopefully. I could always do better. If you guys have any other things, that's why I'm saying, like, hey, stay in contact with us. Ask us, could you do this, or can we do this? Or, you know, even with the outlines, I think I did put on there that you guys can do a video. Yeah, didn't we do that? I think we did. Like, if you guys want to like walk around your room or your office or whatever, just talking about, I think I did it on the reflection as well. Like, if you guys just want to video yourself and you're like, what? Yeah, y'all know you're doing Insta stories. Come on. Oh, UDL is like, there's this stuff that you need to know from this class in a book and PowerPoints and whatnot, but how you learn it, how you prove that you learn it, and how you come to the class, UDL. It's hard because that doesn't always show up in like the traditional like third grade class or whatever. It's kind of interesting. You don't tell your third graders, yeah, come if you want and watch the video later. It's not like that, right? But there's ways that you can be allowable under UDL. And again, UDL is not just for special education, it's for everybody, right? So again, here's some guidelines here. I'm not going to read through all of it, but getting some of the clips from the book is beautiful. I love these clips. I love anything that's like colorful and like helpful, right? Should we have time to, we don't really have time to show this one, but this is a great example that it shows you like how the teacher is following UDL in a 5th grade class, which is beautiful. Good. And then universal design. Again, universal design, if it were a visual, it would be this.
Mhm.
Now, again, universal design for learning is what's the universal design inside of a classroom, but there's universal design in architecture. That's kind of was like the Papa Bear of all of it. The curb cuts, the ramps, elevators, things like that. I don't know if you guys have been on our campus, but over by the gym, because the gym is actually up on a hill, there is like these like switchback stairs, or I was like a ramp. So there's stairs like this, and then there's like a ramp, and it's like a dozen switchbacks. It's pretty awesome because guess what? They're required by law. So you have to have multiple means of ways for people to walk up certain things. Not everybody can do stairs, so you have to have the ramps. It doesn't matter how, right, how many ramps it is, the ramp has to be positive, that has to be there. And again, differentiated instruction is part of UDL because not every student learns the exact same way. Big surprise. And again, teachers must be knowledgeable about each student. So I guarantee you, if I was a fly on the wall in Alicia's school, she would know if little Ralph over there and little Jane over there and little Marisol, who like the Legos and who likes the dolls and who likes the blocks and who likes the Lincoln Logs. Like, I know, you know, that's a mark of a great teacher, because you'd be like, when the kid is like dysregulated or you asking them to build a skill, you do it in the thing that they like. You don't do it in the thing that they don't like. You're going to get a higher chance of success in a highly preferred area. So like right now, again, a reinforcer for my son at school, when he's like focusing and whatnot, he gets time to either like find a race card coloring page on the internet and print it out. Somebody will print it out for him and then I'll hand it to him when he's done his thing. Or he can go look up a recipe and email it to his cooking teacher. That's like his reward. Now, I didn't say, hey, go look up universal design for education because it's important to me. It's not important to him. You got to do the thing that they like, right? If they're ready, if you're pushing them too hard, you're not going to get a good result either. So if they're ready, great. If they're not ready, you got to get them there, right? If you jump too far ahead, you're going to kind of like thwart their success, right? If you don't know them well enough that they're, let's say, tying the shoe, right? If they can only do the one crossover and pull, and you're expecting them to do the whole shebang, they're going to learn that you don't know them well enough to meet them where they're at, right? If you go, hey, did I see you do that all by yourself? Fantastic. Back of their head, you're like, okay, about 300 more times of that, and we'll move on to the next step, right? Yeah, tying of the shoes is a long game. Yeah, right. Same thing with like even something small of like, make sure you put that in your backpack, and then you support them in helping them get it into the backpack. You might have to like hand over hand into the backpack like the first 5 times, right? Oh, do you remember? Oh, you're going to do it by yourself today? Fantastic. You remembered. So you have to meet them where they're at. And then again, learning profiles. Some kids love to do it in circle time, or they love to watch circle time while you're over in the reading nook. And they're learning best over there when they can have their eyeballs on their friends, or vice versa. They want to be alone in a corner under a table. Like, so you have to kind of get to know them a little bit and do what's feasible for them within the guise of safety and, you know, staffing ratios and whatnot. So how do you manage this in your classroom or your center?
Observation. Always begin by observation, getting down to their level, get on the ground, physically interact with them, touch them, feel them, let them touch you. I know that's so hard in COVID. And play. Right. If they're laying on the ground, I lay on the ground. If they're spinning a ball, I spin a ball. I just do what they do. I just take on their interests and then hope to God that they like me.
If you think about that philosophically, it's easier for us to step into their world.
100%. That is my job.
It is easier for us to step into their world than it is for them to step into ours. Mm-hmm. So start with that. Well, I mean, because honestly, I've even said things like, you should be able to do this by now. You're 14. That's how I know mommy needs to step back. I already know the should does not exist, right? I'd be like, okay, show me how far you got. I'm like, oh, okay. So then we're just stuck here. Let's try X, Y, and Z. Yeah. So there's this piece where if you start with the philosophy of we're trying to bridge to them, And then later they can bridge to us, right? Because we're the adults. I mean, we have more time on the planet. We should have more skills too. Sometimes again on a Friday afternoon, maybe not.
Right. So they say.
I was gonna say that like when we have new clients, like the first thing that we do isn't necessarily just like jump into the lessons that we have, but like we've got to build and establish rapport first.
Okay.
So like a lot of the other BTs, I tell them like, you know, okay, so putting data in your iPad isn't as important as like establishing a good relationship with this kid, figuring out what is this kid like, and like getting on their good side, because you're not going to be able to get through any of those lessons if you don't get on their good side first.
Right. And pairing is huge, because why would they listen to you if they don't see that you care about them? Right? Why would they, like, honestly, like, could you imagine walking down the street and a stranger trying to tell you something or punish you? You're like, well, who are you?
Right.
Like, they're like that. They might not have the words about it, but they know, like, you mean something to me or you don't mean something to me.
Right.
And
Right.
even if you're a silly friend, that means something to me.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, you have to pair with them, and sometimes the pairing's slow, sometimes it's super duper fast. So it's one of those things, yeah, you have to be in their bubble because it's too hard otherwise. So content. Part of UDL is like rolling out the content in a meaningful way. Now, again, if I was to come and say, here's 15 chapters, it's all on you, go for it. Overwhelm. Yeah. We roll it out a module at a time. We make it meaningful. We try to get you to connect to different things, again, with different types of expression and whatnot. Same thing with kids. They don't want it all overwhelmed, right? And we don't want to be like, oh, well, you don't have that skill built. Well, we're moving on. Can't do that. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's one of these pieces, like, you have to know if they're a little bit stuck, that's okay. Let's put some more supports in place, but there's a process to identify that one. Again, differentiation with the teaching is like, some kids are way more hands-on. Some kids want to talk about it. Some kids need to like have it in their hand and run around the yard. I had this one kid who was doing flashcards, and he would learn because he was what's the word? It was the proprioception, I think. He was on a swing, and every time he came forward, he'd flashcard. Right? What are some other ways that your kiddos learn?
Me?
Anyway.
Movement is a huge motivator for learning. Anytime you get a kid like vestibular, jumping, scootering, crossing midline, ball throwing and catching and answering. Best way to learn how to say hi is throw a ball at them, and then they catch it. Hi, hi, hi. Motor is huge.
Could you imagine sitting at a desk with your hands flat on the desk and your feet on the floor singing the ABC song?
Mm-hmm.
No, man, it needs to be an interpretive dance of like rap and slam poetry and like dance and jumping. Like, that's how like ABCs get into the body. And then what we do, we say, you need to sit down and pay attention. No, we need to have that scope a little bit more open at this point, because when learning feels like play, it doesn't feel like learning. And guess what? It's increasing the neural pathways when you use, like, I like the piece where you said midline. We use both sides of the body to learn something, and makes it in there stronger. It really does. And quicker too. So again, there's a lot of different things that we can do to differentiate instruction. That was process. And then product is challenge them at their different levels of readiness, and give them just a little bit more than they can, just a tiny bit, because you know what? They will surprise you. They will surprise you. And oftentimes, I think as a society, we see a child who is disabled and we underestimate them. Don't overshoot it, but like, see where they're at and maybe give it a little. I challenge you to do one more of those things, 3 more of those. Let's try. I can't do it. Let's try again. Just try 3 more times. You know, I had a kid who every time he would do like the target behavior, I'd be like, oh man, that's awesome. And he's like, what are you doing with your fingers? I was like, snapping. I want to do that. And so I was like, okay, every time you do X, Y, and Z, I'll teach you how to snap. And then we got, not only did I teach you how to snap, but then we could do patterns. Right. And so it was like, and then we would snap and do all these. So it was like, it was just something that he was interested in, and he worked hard for that. And I was like, wait till I teach you how to whistle. And so, I mean, again, see where they're at and give them those little reinforcers to challenge them just a tiny little bit more. That learning menus is a cool one too. It's like giving them different things, how they can express themselves. Like, okay, well, I need to show you that I've learned about this, but I'll show you how I want to do it. I want to do it this way. I want to make a short film, or I want to make a song, or I want to make a PowerPoint, or I want to do whatever. Let them. Why not? Right?
My question would be like, what would be your advice for like those like middle child to adolescents who are like, you're trying to find out what their motivation is, but they already know that you're going to use that motivator to get like something you want. So they're like, no, I'm not interested in doing anything.
And that is such a fun time. That's just such a fun age because they see you. They can see a couple steps ahead. Where like the little ones don't always see a couple steps ahead, maybe, but the older ones are like, yeah. So I like gummy bears, and I see that you're going to try to use those as a reinforcer. I see that you brought Oreos. Yeah, I don't want Oreos. Like you're like, that's cool. And then I'll just be like, and every once in a while I would do it where I would do the thing and I'd be like, all right, this might be really super silly, check in with your supervisor, but I'd be like, okay, well, you know what? I brought these and I kind of want them. So is there like a skill that maybe I should be building and then you can reinforce me? I literally would flip the script and have them be for like 30 minutes, maybe 15, and be like, and then he'd be like, okay, well, I'm gonna leave you alone. I'm like, all right, so let's write this down. I'm gonna leave you alone for every 10 seconds I leave you alone. Do I get one? Oh, no. You have to leave me alone for 10 minutes. I'm not going to do that. So you just basically get into like you're pairing with them in their world. It's a negotiation. And then every once in a while in the middle of the negotiation, I would just eat one. Hey, you can't do that. I'm like, oh, why not? Well, we didn't. Oh, okay. Just wasn't sure we were done. Like, it just kind of like you can do it. You can bridge with them. Or you can just lay it out and just say, hey, so what do you want to work for? What do you want to work for? And of course the answer is nothing. Well, that's cool. Well, I don't want to work for anything either. So let's just do it for funsies. Wait, what? Oh, so maybe we can talk about reinforcers. Oh, so we don't need any reinforcers? That's cool. You're going to do all this stuff for like nothing? Awesome. I mean, they're like, oh man, I did want those. You're like, okay. So what do you think you could earn? How do you think you could earn these? You don't have to earn them, but if you were gonna, what would you do? What would you think would be fair? If you were the teacher, what would you do? So you can flip the script, you can be silly, again, run it by your supervisor, because if you start going super silly, they might not be super supportive. But again, there's a lot of different things. Like teenagers or preteens are fun. Because they they think they're so grown. They think they got a leg up on you. And you can't tell them that that they think they're all grown and they have a leg up. It's so hilarious. I'm like, oh, you think you're going to win this one. And you know what? Maybe you are. Maybe you are going to win that one. Because, like adults don't win every battle. So there's this thing. Or you can actually get them to, you can actually reinforce them to just negotiate with you. Hey, you know what? I really do appreciate this like adult conversation we had. So, I brought this Hot Wheel. Yeah, I brought this Hot Wheel thing. And like we didn't do exactly what we were going to do to get it, but I think our conversation was actually very, whatever. It's like couched in your program. It's like in there. You're like doing Dan on the, yeah, you know what? You almost earned this one. I bet we could do one thing that you could for sure earn this thing. And then you pick the thing that's the least preferred item. Like the one, if you're getting like arguments on taking out the trash, I really wanted to give this to you, man. And I like this thing that we did over here. It was close. I almost gave it to you. Maybe if you did like one last thing, this is all yours. So you're getting the one in there that they said, I'm not going to do that. And I don't want that thing. You could do it. I know you can. Yeah. It's a little dance with the older ones. It's a little dance, but you have to talk to them like they want to be talked to. You really do. And they think they're grown, so treat them like they're grown. But knowing that you're not. But like,
yeah. It's like some days it's like really good. Like I can just pretend like I do the work, like role playing and stuff, or I'm like, oh well, I had a situation where I had a bad problem with one of my friends, and
See?
we're working on social problem solving.
Yeah.
And I reacted like this, and then guess what happened? And blah blah. And she's like, engaged.
Yeah, see?
And then I'm like, okay, well, now it's your turn. So how would you?
It's like, it's all fun and games when you have the problem. It's not it's not all on her, right?
Yeah.
The thing is that's a social skill to learn too, that adults are human people too, with bad days and arguments and the whole business. And so, like, again, I believe that children think that they just want to, like, oh, I'm going to go from like 12 to 18. I'm going to skip over everything and I don't need any of the skills. I'm just going to be 18 like tomorrow. And then I'm going to be an adult and I can do whatever I want. You're like, okay, a couple of things there. Number 2, the road is the part where you learn to go. And number 3, 18 ain't all that. Number 10, it's like, you still have to pay taxes and, blah, 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 all this stuff, right? So this is really, it's this interesting thing. It is a really interesting song and dance. But I want to get through the last several thing. I know we're at 8 o'clock, but things I wanted to let you know here. We already talked about 3 common types of assessment for database. So diagnostic assessments and actual assessment. They can look totally different. They can be actually a checklist. They can be an observation, all these different diagnoses. I think I did 4 of those this week for my son. Formative assessment we talked about, it's how it's connected to the person. It's a little bit more personalized. And so it could be like an essay, it could be an interview, it could be a portfolio, right? And a summative assessment is more like a quiz or a test. It's like this is all the stuff that you learned, show me on a quiz or a test. So same thing, you can see where a set of skills are based on different types. Now, again, if you have this kid who can't write very well, you're not going to say, hey, let's do an essay. You're going to see behaviors. Is there another way that we can assess that level of knowledge? Yes, there is. And again, type of database assessment. So again, like Alicia said, this is all proof at the beginning when the parents are like, well, how do you know? And this and that. And you know what? They really want to know that the child's doing well. Even if they had a super duper bad day, find something to share. Find something to share. Progress monitoring is another level of this formative assessments. It's like breaking a bigger assessment down into little teeny tiny steps. Might be easier. So like, for example, progress monitoring might look like this. This particular worksheet is all adding fractions. So it's one skill, different numbers, right? So now you can say, check, this child can add fractions. The next worksheet might look like subtracting fractions, all the same. Check, maybe they got an 70%. Is that good enough? Yes, right? This other one, we call them probes, right? It has all different types of math on there. So you could say, so after you score this one, they got all the pluses really good. So like B and E, they did really good. But anything that's like multiplying, like the H and the I and the L and the K, like maybe they didn't do so great at that, or they did great at the multiplication that was one digit, but when it came to 2 digits and 2 digits, they tanked it. So then you can say, oh, now I got to go back and isolate which skill that they have and which skill that they don't have. So one is a more specific sample mastery. This is one specific skill probe, and this one is like a broader scope. And they can give you more information, but they have different ways of doing it. Same thing, what would you do with a small, this is for like a little bit older kids. Alicia, how would you do this with younger kids? Not maths per se.
You could do it like if you were talking about like how to brush teeth.
Yes.
Like you could take it just the whole entire sample of are the teeth brushed, or you could say break it down into smaller parts. Like, are they not loading the toothbrush? Are they not putting it in their mouth? Are they not turning the water on? Just something like that.
Yeah. Or hand washing. Mine will wash hands like this. And literally.
Task analysis.
Yes. That is a synonym. Yes.
Task analysis. So yeah, so look at math as a task, right? You can see this is like, did they master one step of the task or they master the whole task, right? Because this looks like 3rd grade math, maybe 2nd grade math. And so there's this piece. So are you looking at one piece of the puzzle or the whole puzzle, right? And so, yeah, it's this thing like, he's like, well, I washed my hands. I'm like, you didn't use soap. You didn't dry them. So that's like, no. We're learning how to wash dishes properly now too.
Oh.
He literally said, come on, Mom, only the inside of the pot needs to be clean. I said, just as a cultural reference here, You have grown up your whole life in a house. Both the outsides and the insides have been cleaned your whole life. The last thing we'll probably wrap it up here is with RTI. Write this acronym down, response to intervention. This is how you know your interventions are working. So if you're constantly working on the task analysis or reversing or whatever with teeth brushing and they're not getting any better at it, we have to kind of break it down. But RTI has a little bit more to do with academics, but it's very similar, very, very similar. So think of it, when we are in class together, I actually do an art project for this because these things can be a little boring, not gonna lie. MTSS, this is another acronym you all know, multi-tier systems of supports. There's two of them. One is for academics and one is for behavior. And if you are in the behaviors world, you're probably very familiar with the behavior one. And then there's one for academics that just says like, oh, maybe this person needs a little bit more supports in, math or language arts or whatever. So the primary instruction, all students, again, if we're playing Monopoly, all students are going to play the same game. There's no reason to play Monopoly if you have chutes and ladders instructions in there. How's that going to work? No, nobody's going to succeed at that, right? So we identify the primary instruction. That means like everybody gets the instruction. So let's say, going back to these worksheets, today class, we're working on adding fractions. Now she doesn't do all the gobbledygook. She does all the fractions. If you look here, they're all the same denominator. Now, for those of you who remember this part of math, having the same denominator makes this really easy. When the denominator is different, then you have to do way more steps. So she starts with the easy stuff. She might even do the ones that are only one digit, right? So the quality instruction, the first tier is like everybody's learning this. Now, out of that whole instruction, that whole lecture, or that whole whatever she's doing to present that, let's say half the class gets it first try. Awesome. She now knows that half of the class is kind of good to go, right? The other half of the class, she's like, okay, maybe I need to do like, okay, so those of you who turned in, and if you got an 8, 9, or 10 on your worksheet, you guys can go ahead and do X, Y, and Z. She's gonna give them a task. And these other people over here, no big deal. Let's just try again. Don't freak out. Again, I firmly believe if something's new, it takes you a couple of times to get it, especially math. People kind of, right? So then she'll go back and say, all right, let's try again. Maybe I wasn't specific enough. It's good as a teacher to reflect. Maybe I was talking too fast. Maybe I wasn't clear. Did the lights go out? Did sirens go by? Was it distracting? Was I talking in a monotone tone? Did I talk too long? My friend was doing her student teaching in a fourth grade math class where the teacher expected the fourth graders to sit in a seat for 45 minutes without moving, doing math. I don't think I could do that, right? That's not fair, right? So you got to kind of switch it up, whatever. So then you've identified this. Now you're doing a little bit second level supports. Maybe you're like, oh, maybe just let's work in groups together, or let me put a mnemonic with it, or maybe let's make a song, or let's do a chant. Let's do something kind of creative. So we're trying to like give them a second chance in maybe a different way. Let me present it a little bit differently. Maybe I use a different analogy. Maybe I'll talk about sports or cars or whatever, friends or money or quarters. That helps, right? When you're talking about 1 and 4 quarters, right? And then out of that second half that needed the secondary interventions, about 10 students left did not get it. No problem. You move on to the tertiary intervention. And that could be like, okay, now you 3 are going to sit over here and you 2 are going to, and then we're going to do this activity. We're going to do 3 separate little activities and switch, or you're going to quiz each other. And like, you just kind of do more intensive supports. Make sense? It's the same thing as if I was learning how to make a new recipe of something, do a new craft. I'm not great at sewing. I'm going to have to spend some time there. I picked up the ukulele over the summer. It's like, all right, I take more time to do this. I learned something new, and then it just gets easier, right? But it takes me more than one time to learn it. So it looks sort of like this. Think of it at the bottom as a foundation. Everybody gets the foundation. And then a few more students get more supports. And then a few less students get that secondary support. And then at the top, there's just a very few students left. Now, again, if you went to the secondary interventions and you got it, you're good. Moving on. But if you needed more help and you get up to tertiary interventions and you still don't get it, that's going to be kind of an area of concern. And then sometimes, so this is what happens in a typical classroom. A typical classroom should, right? If at this point, maybe there's 2 students here, one of them gets it and they get to go back to the big group. The other one is just never going to get it. Now, my sister-in-law was a vice principal in a prison. And she said, I met grown men with the attention span of a 3-year-old who had who could retain stuff like a 3-year-old. She's like, I know that they were smart and they were organized and things like that, but they couldn't remember stuff. They couldn't apply stuff. So these things can happen for adults too, but we're trying to get students to understand, hey, if you don't get it the first time, no big deal. We got some supports. Second time, let's do that again. Right? Then after this point is where we have like a referral to like maybe a special math class or some other supports that are very, very specialized. And we'll talk about that next week. Now, the second, I would say almost pyramid, is the one on behavior called PBIS. Now, again, this is typically what you would see in a K-12 environment. But now that TK is getting more universal and like pre is going to get more universal, you're going to see this. Now, PBIS, positive behavior intervention supports, again, positive. Schools are not to punish students, but we have to start with the rules. Now, I think my son was in the 1st grade or 2nd grade when they rolled out PBIS in the district in his school. And it was basically saying, hey, I know we're all playing Monopoly, but let's check in with the rules. And the rules are a little bit updated, right? It's like old Uno cards versus new Uno cards. Same game, but let's just get like the new instructions in there, right? They put up posters. They literally walked the students around campus and they said, okay, so when you come to the library, this is where it says your voice should be low, right? But the computer lab's a little bit louder. In the hallways, we walk, but we can have a regular voice. And in the playground, we can have a big voice. So they literally toured every single student to say, hey, you got the rules now. That also included the parents. Now, they didn't walk the parents from room to library because we don't go there, right? But you bet your butt they put out posters in the parking lot, in the pickup and drop off zone. We use kind words to all of the people. Yeah, so no honking the horns, no flipping the birds, no jaywalking across the street. Like, trust me, they did the instructions. The playing field was squared for everybody. It was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful thing. And so when the kids messed up, they didn't say, okay, little Johnny or Sarah, you go to the corner. They said like, hey, as a reminder, this is where we expect your voice to be and your body to be in, right? And then they'd be like, oh, thank you, friend, for doing that. And this, and it was like, hey, friend, as a reminder. So it was just those sorts of things, right? Does that make sense? And again, if there's a foundation of the playing field, but then some kids might need a reminder, right? And there might be something like a positive little ticket. We had like, little bucks that they could turn it in for pencils and erasers or whatever. But then there's also like, hey, I see that you're consistently having trouble not running in the hallways. And as a reminder, that's for safety and that's the rules on the wall, blah, 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 blah. And then there's a thing where like maybe they'd go talk to, a counselor or principal or something like that, not quite a referral, it's not a punishment. It was just like, hey, I just wanted to see if you understood what we were saying. Maybe the child's like, I don't understand what you mean. Oh, okay, well, then let's just explain it in a way that it's helpful to you, right? So if it's not in a way that they understand, so how can we get mad at them, right? So there's this piece where it's like, you have to give some grace, you have to give some leeway, and kids are just learning. I remember when I specifically was in, maybe the 5th grade, and they put something like this in place, but it was like out of the blue, they're like, we're gonna do whistles at the end of recess, because they didn't have bells, because I went to school with a billion years ago, right? Right? They had whistles, and they said when you hear the whistle, everybody had to freeze. Now, the first week of implementing the whistle, not everybody was freezing because, we're little, we're 10, and we're like, whatever. But by Friday, they were giving out like conduct, like you're in trouble tickets or whatever. It was like, and I still remember to this day, one of my very best friends are still friends. She was like, you remember that week? I totally got in trouble. And it was like, maybe if it was more like, hey, I see that Mr. Phelps' class totally lined up right after the whistle, and they froze, and then they lined up without being reminded. You guys get to go to recess 5 minutes early. So you always do the positive support. But so again, these things, these are supposed to be across the United States. This is not just optional anymore. Yeah. So how do you do it in the preschool environment, Alicia?
Token economies for, yeah, like that's a huge one. Yeah. So depending on what you're trying to do or not do, but token economies, that's really it. I was thinking when I first started teaching, when you were talking, I used to give sticks. So I would walk around my classroom, they would decorate their little stick jar at the beginning of the year. And so whenever I saw them doing something great, and we talked about the rules, and whenever they were abiding by the rules, I ever so quietly just handed them a stick. And then depending on the child, depending on like what children were at the end of the day or at the end of the week. And then they got to turn them in. If they got 20 sticks or 10 sticks, depending on the child, then they got to go to the treasure box.
That's fantastic. I remember my second grade teacher did like marbles in a jar for the team.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like you want to get like second graders can start working collaboratively as like a mini team. And then there was like marbles in a jar. I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was, everyone's like, like, so you guys kind of get each other to work for, yeah. But again, I like how you said, it's like, sometimes earning 10 sticks is a big deal, but you know them, they can go for 20.
Right. And you can also work on counting. You can work on, there's just a bunch of skills worked in there.
So RTI and PBIS are very, very similar. They just have different words. And so that's why I would do it as like art project, and they're still in 99 because I would be like, hey, I have all these supplies, let's go for it. And so I would have pipe cleaners and straws and whatever, clay, whatever, and we would make these pyramids. And the difference in the wording has to do with the academic instruction. You're going to see universal at both sides. So universal interventions for instruction and interventions for behavioral instruction. But then it goes into universal, secondary, and tertiary for academic, and then universal, secondary, and tertiary for behavior. It's pretty much the same thing. You're just going to see about the same amount of students break it down. So think about it in your classes coming up. So if there was 10 students in your class, like eight out of the 10 got it the first time. And maybe one was here and one was there. And after then, you might not see your friend in your math class because they're going to end up in a different class. And we'll talk about placement next week. But it's pretty straightforward, and it's kind of keeps it similar because you have the academic interventions and the behavior interventions. And again, nobody's in trouble, but this helps identify, does this person need more support? Listen, my kid was at the behavior piece, like at the top, like the second it was implemented, I was like, because he could not understand, he has a lack of social awareness. And then the principal literally said to me, but he just told me the motto of the school, like whatever. The
recall was great.
Oh yeah, courageous, kind, and blah, 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 and gives 100% effort 100% of the time. And then he just broke it right in front of me. I said, yes, that is the nature of autism. It was like, she said, but he just told me. I was like, you know, both of those things can exist in the world at the exact same time. Right. But it's weird because people think like, once you know the rules, you're going to follow all the rules. For 80 to 90% of the students, that is correct.
Right.
That is correct. He did not have the skill set in which to follow it. Did he want to follow the rules? Yes. Did he want to be in trouble? No.
Right.
Did he want everybody to like him? Yes. Did he hate going to the principal's office? Yes. But then he also was like, yeah, she let me hang out under her desk and play with her iPad all day. I was like, oh yeah, they got a letter on that one.
Oh goodness.
That was the third day of kinder.
Oh my God.
It's already like third day of kindergarten. I'm not kidding. Went to walk. I lived across the street. I walked over, and there was like a sheriff's car there. She goes, "Now they're not here for him." I was like,
"Oh my goodness!"
Third day. There was another kid we had a problem with, but we did bring him in just to thinking maybe that would be a supportive intervention. And he's like, "Cool, you got a belt and this and that." I'm like, "He's not afraid of police officers. He's too social. He thinks he's gonna be like."
Yeah, he wants to be one.
Yeah, I was like, that wasn't. He actually looked at it like, I'm so special. I got to go meet the sheriff and nobody else did. And I was like, you actually just reinforced his idea I'm special and I don't have to follow the rules. So good one. Good one. And I didn't mean to reinforce him with the iPad. Yeah, but you did it.
Yeah.
And so now you have how many more years with this kid? Oh, trust me. Oh, trust me. So that's pretty much the end of, the end of it. So you were going to hear, how about I'll let Professor Fernandez roll out with this one. The vocabulary for PBIs, and that's the end.
Just a couple things they talked about that just didn't fit in anywhere, but I think were key is scaffolding instruction. A task analysis, we had talked about that, is finding, like if they're breaking down between the primary and the secondary and the tertiary, how are we going to scaffold it? What are we going to break down in order to know where the breakdown is so that we can help them and not get them and not stop them. So if it's just from a primary to a tertiary, how can we help them in that before we get to the third level? And we just need to scaffold that. We need to break it down. Just to just go to basic. Special education goes to the smallest denominator. That is I always say that's our special power. Like we see things in small increments, and that is the ability to scaffold really quick. What is it that they're breaking down? So if it's like math, is it that they're breaking down this? I'm not a math person. So is it on this side of the math that we're breaking down? Are we adding it? Not right. Like what part are we breaking down? And then the last one is for not the academic, but the behavioral would be a functional behavior assessment, an FBA. And that's just taking the empirical, the data, and showing exactly what's working, what isn't working, and looking at then how we can fix it.
Right. So for example, and we'll talk way more about FBAs. And I mean, literally looking at the behavior. If they're like a child is like, hey, everybody pull out your math book, and the kid bolts towards the door. You're like, that's we're going to collect some data on that, but that data probably shows math shows up, the kid's literally trying to escape. Right. Mine is more like, oh, I don't want to do this, so I'm going to create like a big issue where the whole class laughs at me, and then I love it. So it's attention, right? So we'll talk way more about that. But as you get different people observing it, different times of the day, different sort of patterns emerge, right? So that you could literally figure out what they're going to do. And as adults, we can kind of predict this, or we can block the door, or have some other, like we're, at least you're saying scaffold, is more like, what can we do? Like I look at it like training wheels. Scaffolding is like literally building a scaffold. Like my local Target has a scaffold up in the front because they're redoing the facade of Target, right? How can we like put that little scaffold there and help update the skill, and then take the scaffold away and see how the skill holds up? So it's literally like providing supports and training wheels, so we don't have to go to the third level. I love that you in your clinic are probably so highly trained that you can identify it. I can tell you in the gen ed setting, they didn't say, hey, what can we do as instructors to scaffold this child? They said, what's wrong with the child that he's not understanding? So I love that your culture like digs in, and that's the key, because when teachers, and by the way, teachers aren't behaviorists, right? They're teachers. Right. So we have other professionals on campus to help with these things. Right. But again, you can have all the training and the letters after your name and still not have a clue. So there's, like I said, every school is a little different. All the supports look a little bit different at different schools. But what, as professionals, highly trained adults who have been on the planet longer, if we are being manipulated by a child, then we got to have a conversation about that, right?
Yes.
We can be all you have to be is a half a step in front of a child. That's it. Physically and literally, figuratively and literally, be aware of what they're going to do, maybe half a step before they do, block, ignore, like the things like that. We'll talk way more about this, but again, there's a lot of things we can do as adults to help, again, identify the behavior almost before it occurs. Right. Quite frankly, if you've seen a behavior twice, it's going to happen a third time.
And that would be the point of the functional behavior assessment.
Correct. Right. And if you're not sure you saw it twice, wait for the third time. I guarantee it'll be a fourth. Mm-hmm. So like, again, in my house, it looked like every time we went to go tie shoes, there was this huge argument. I have a solution for that problem. We can take the laces out, or we just go to Velcro and slip-ons. It was like no more arguing. It was great. There was a skill that was being on pause, which is not end of the world, right? Because, I figured by 30, he could tie a shoe. To this day, and I was like, yeah, he can. He waited till 12. Guess what? Check. Moving on, right? In the house right now, it's homework, and it's not an argument. He does this we call it the shell game, the bait and switch.
Mhm.
Like, hey, what homework do you have? Now, mind you, I already got an email from his one-on-one, whatever, his teachers, blah, blah, blah. I have all this stuff. And then I go, what homework do you have tonight? I already know. And he's like, is Shiloh barking at the backyard? Oh, mommy, you look so pretty today.
Avoidance.
I'm just gonna unload the dishwasher real quick. And then what? I mean, the total teenager like shell game, it's hilarious.
Mhm.
I'm like, hey,
Mhm.
guess what? I've noticed the last 3 times I've asked you, hey, what's up with the homework? You totally try to change the subject. He's like, gets real quiet. I'm like, oh, okay. So the quiet comes after changing the subject. It
Mhm.
must be hard to have a parent as a behavior. Poor kid. Hope your kids don't get mad at you for that. You're like,
Oh yeah, no, I've ruined them. Yeah.
let's see, like a behaviorist and a first grade teacher. And they're like,
Yes. Are very ruined children. Very, yes.
and they're like, I could see what you're trying to get away with before you even try to get away with it.
Yes.
So funny. So, I mean, there's a lot that we covered tonight, but questions, comments, concerns, complaints. What? I mean, there's a lot. That's why I was like, chapter 2 and 3, they have to go together. I'm sorry about that, but you guys can do it. I believe you. This, if you take all what we learned tonight and apply it to chapter 3, then it makes sense because, again, universal design, everybody has the same playing field. It doesn't matter when we start to get into culturally and linguistically diverse learners. It doesn't matter if we're all on the same page, we all have the same rules. The problem is that people's bias starts to wrinkle the rules a little bit, right? And we as teachers, we have a professional code of ethics to be unbiased as possible, but we are human too. So obviously we don't expect clear outward bias, but we all have implicit bias. That's why we wanted to do that in the discussion board this week too. So cool. Questions, comments, concerns? I see that Jay's having some tech issues. She's coming in, coming out.
I know.
And CC made it all the way to the end.
Thank you.
And then and I think we lost Luce, but that's okay. You guys can come in and come out.
Sorry, I'm
No.
having such horrible tech
Oh,
issues.
that's okay. Listen, I'm gonna stop the recording.